Hi, let's do the allotted Moon Knight analysis. Oscar Isaac looks like he's having a nice time. Structurally and tonally, it's very much an MCU thing. The storytelling is often somewhat interesting, but the delivery of it is consistently quite bad, and it doesn't look very good. Alright, let's talk about the streaming business model. Now, this is going to build off of what I talked about in the Book of Boba Fett video. So, if you haven't seen that, you're either going to have to watch that, or just accept a level of alienation here. But either way, I win. So Netflix has been having a time of it lately. They came up with this streaming business model where you would just spend a fuck ton on content, spend more than you earn on content, underprice the subscription so the consumers would love it because they're getting great value, and no one can compete with you because you're losing money like a fuckwit, and the idea is eventually there'll be no competition left, so you can switch from losing money to making a lot of money. So now they're $14 billion in debt. And their business model only really works if they keep growing forever. Because if they stop growing, they're just not going to be able to find the money to pay off their debts. In 5 or 10 years, they just have to find $14 billion somewhere. But it was all going swimmingly until the novel coronavirus happened. They had to stop production, they had to stop spending, they couldn't really acquire any new content, but people were at home. So their subscription count kept ticking up. And for the first time ever, Netflix was making money. And that sweet, sweet taste of cash got the executives acting up, and they made a commitment to stop borrowing and be cash flow positive by the start of 2022. So they slowed down on spending on content. Instead of throwing money at people and letting them do what they want, they started to really micromanage what little content they still make. They've upped their subscription prices, and they're selling merch, and they've done it. For the first time ever, they are cash flow positive. But of course, at the same time, they're offering less for more, and that's come at the cost of, for the first time ever, losing subscribers. And remember, if they don't keep growing forever, that's it. Their entire business model is fucked. It wasn't a big loss of subscribers. They'll probably still pull it back, but it definitely hints that their insane fucking stupid ass plan isn't exactly gonna pan out. Streaming made video stores obsolete. Blockbuster had to close because they were running a useless, outdated business model. They had to close with like 900 million in debt. But Netflix, fucking 14 billion in debt, now that's the future. What Netflix hadn't predicted was that other companies would enter streaming and be able to lose even more money than them. Like Hulu, the streaming service, it costs $9 a month and they lose money on that. But it's a loss leader for Hulu plus Live TV, which costs $90 a month, and they make money on that. For Apple, they want to get you into their product ecosystem. They want you buying that Apple TV box. And as they position themselves as like a premium brand, something like buying Coda after it won a bunch of awards means that Apple gets to win an Academy Award. Similar to Amazon, they lose money on the streaming, but over half of their Prime subscribers subscribe because of the streaming. So they actually make money because they're shopping at Amazon. And there is a bit of prestige in there as well. An ex-Amazon executive said it was just something that Jeff Bezos really wanted because it gave them access to the Hollywood social scene. There's actually a quote here: Prime Video is a loss leader for Jeff's sex life. And Disney want to get people out in theaters, buying their merch, out in their parks, buying their releases, which is all helped by linking those things into streaming. Because while streaming doesn't make money for them, it does get a lot of eyes. Disney spends 10 to 20 billion on Disney Plus every year, and they absolutely don't make it back. The Disney Plus revenue is like 6 billion a year, so they're losing like twice what they make. They make more money from DVD sales. But that's the idea. They do make it back somewhere. They lose money on streaming, but they make it back in other areas. So it's essentially a marketing expense. But even if it's offset, it's still an insane loss to make. So they do this weird thing where they have to make the content seem as premium as possible while spending as little as possible, which means it's all about bankable IP, which is where we get the cross-media narrative show. It's a show that hooks into as many of your other products as possible while being a bit of a draw of its own and being as cheap as possible. So WandaVision was pitched by Kevin Feige, who had an unusually hands-on role on production throughout. And the pitch of WandaVision is very clever. You get to do a multi-camera live shoot in one location very quickly. The effects aren't fancy. It's all practical, it's all cheap, it's all quick. Of course, it goes into some single camera shoots and visual effects work and all that stuff. But the framing of the show minimizes that. To shoot on a traditional sitcom setup is like going to be a day or two. They shoot it live. So they've basically blown through half of their show in a couple of weeks, as opposed to the 110, 130 days that it would take for them to do any of these other shows, which is an incredible saving. And of course, the show links directly into their theatrical release. Now, similarly, in the pitch of Moon Knight is this idea that most of the time he's a normal guy in the normal world, and even when you do a fight or whatever, you can just cut around it or not do the visual effects. So built into the premise of the show is a savings. And where WandaVision directly led into Doctor Strange, the release schedule of Moon Knight will directly lead into Doctor Strange. They've got the year booked out with all their shit. It's going to go, you know, Moon Knight ends, Doctor Strange starts, Doctor Strange has a bit of a theater run, then Thor starts, and that has a bit of a theater run. Then I guess the Obi-Wan show. Anyway, it's all fine. Then there's a bit of a theme in these shows. The effects work starts pretty good, a little bit wonky, and then it gets worse. So the question is, why? Marvel is a well-oiled machine. They know what they're doing. So what's going on with this over-reliance on kind of bad visual effects? Surely it would be cheaper, it would look better to do a lot of this stuff somewhat practically. Why pre-visualize so much? Why take so much control away from their directors? There's a lot of these weird decisions that I think just clearly, to a lot of people, make for a worse product. Part of their thing now is that they get these big name actors. It's kind of their draw. It's one of the selling points of the MCU. And especially when they're doing a Disney Plus marketing thing, they really want some names attached. And no one wants to get roped into a Marvel contract. But these big stars have a lot of bargaining power. Everyone else has none, but the biggest stars have quite a lot. So Marvel's built this system around massively overpaying some of their talent and then pinching pennies everywhere else. Their biggest expense is talent, and their second biggest is visual effects, which is the way it has to be. Most obviously is Robert Downey Jr. Like every second he's on set, they lose $50, and there's a lot of seconds in a day, so they just want to have him on set for as little time as possible. So you shoot all in one place, you have all your shots ready to go, you don't really do makeup, you don't have time to set up a practical effect, you just absolutely minimize the amount of time that the talent has to spend on set. Then you hand it off to visual effects, where everyone's overworked and underpaid, because visual effects is an industry that's arrived after some very naughty boys decided to deregulate everything. So they have the bare minimum worker protections and no history of unions. So the cost of that is going to be cheaper, even though you're paying more people to do exponentially more work over a longer period of time. And if it's balanced right, basically half of the budget is talent, half of the budget is visual effects, and then there's a little slice of everything else in the middle. I think maybe it would be worth exploring this in detail. We've got time. People often say that stuff has bad visual effects, but what am I actually talking about here? I don't know if this is worthwhile. Let's dig in. So this is indicative of your typical Moon Knight visual effects shot, and it's interesting, right? The model looks good, the animation looks good, the cloth sim is pretty good, but then the scene, the render, the lighting, the composite all looks pretty bad. Now, a big problem with this is what they've shot. It's a desert scene during the day, which is already off the bat a very difficult thing to do if you're trying to do it on the cheap, so that's a bad call. But then there's like nothing practical here. They're clearly lit by studio lighting. They couldn't even go outside to shoot this. And that's obviously about not wasting Oscar Isaac's time, which, you know, as soon as he's got that Moon Knight suit on, it's like actual costumes, practical effects, crazy camera moves. As long as Oscar Isaac's face isn't involved, they can go apeshit. So they've maybe not created the best starting point here with the way that they've shot it, but theoretically, you know, it could be rescued with visual effects. So why didn't they? With visual effects, everything has a flaw of how little you could spend. They obviously need to make this really nice character model for their advertising, like it was in a Super Bowl advert and that stuff looks really great. And either that model exists or it doesn't. Same with motion capture here. Either the motion capture is done, it's cleaned up, it's working, or it isn't. There's not a ton of wiggle room, but they didn't shoot anything in Egypt. There's obviously no background plates to work off here. There's basically no set. So for this 2-minute scene, that has to be made, and it's just a question of how much money do they want to spend on that, which is obviously wildly variable. Bare minimum, you've got some background plates in there, but it could go up to the point of the best artists in the business making an incredibly detailed, complex scene that is like a real lived-in world. Same with the lighting, bare minimum, you know, you've got some lights in the scene, they're kind of lined up, but you could go to the extreme of completely recreating the world just to match the lighting. Digital double Oscar Isaac just to have an accurate shadow. And then with rendering, for about the past 15 years, all Hollywood visual effects have been ray traced, which is like where you calculate all of the interactions of the rays of light as they bounce around the scene. Games still use direct illumination, which just much more simply looks at like what faces of the object are facing light sources, and it gets you kind of close enough. The reason games don't use ray tracing or are just starting to use ray tracing or a partial ray tracing is because it's incredibly intensive. To ray trace a Hollywood visual effects shot, they need to have these massive render farms so they can get these renders done. And recently in movies there's been this push to get direct illumination to the point where it can kind of compete with ray tracing. And big movies have started using it again, sort of situationally, because it's basically real time. There's no render costs. Then the composite, bare minimum, you've got all the elements in the scene slapped on top of each other, but there's a lot of iteration to do there. You can go in and clean up the key, go and touch up areas of it by hand, make sure the light wrap is exactly accurate, match the colors perfectly, the lens there's essentially an endless amount of improvement that you could do there, which would end with photorealistic composite. It's just a question of how much you want to spend. And as mentioned, on Disney Plus, they don't really want to spend. So they're going with cheaper visual effects houses, the places known for doing real-time work, outsourced roto, quick composites, smaller, scrappier studios, the places that do like the CW shows and sci-fi and that stuff. And they're also using almost exclusively Vancouver-based visual effects houses because British Columbia has a tax credit for 16% of what you spend in post-production on local labor. Basically 16% of their post-production spend is returned to Disney in cash from the provincial government. So they didn't go outside to shoot this in actual sunlight because of the Hungarian climate. They've shot Moon Knight almost entirely in Hungary because Hungary has one of the most aggressive production tax credit systems in the world. If you spend at least 80% of your production costs in Hungary, they will give you 30% of your total production budget back as a cash refund. So they spent like 80% there, and then with the rest of it, they shot a little bit in Jordan because it looks nice, and then they shot like the rest in Slovenia because in Slovenia you get 25% of your Slovenian spend back as a cash refund, which stacks with the Hungarian 30%. This all started with the state of Georgia in 2005. They offered a 30% tax credit on anything spent in production in Georgia, which made them quite the hub for production. Most of the Marvel movies are shot in Georgia, but it's now a system that's been adopted the world over. In theory, these programs are built to help local artists and stimulate local economies. But in reality, just massive fucking conglomerates come through and rip millions out of government budget just to make some bullshit that no one wants to see and isn't even profitable. But that's not even what I want to talk about. That's a side note. Fuck, I want to wrap this up. Now, Netflix's goal of destroying all competition and being the only option left standing shouldn't be possible. That's called a monopoly, and it's famously hated. It's a horizontal monopoly where they control an entire step of the supply chain. So they would control all of streaming. Having that sort of dominance would absolutely choke the possibilities of what could be made. But fortunately their plan was stupid as fuck and it hasn't panned out. Now historically it wasn't even theoretically possible because monopolies are bad. It's generally agreed upon. If one company has too much of a market share or too much control over a supply chain, it's anti-competitive. They can offer worse services for more money because of the lack of options. Monopolies are inefficient, they rig markets, and they're undemocratic, and they rig governments. So there's always been antitrust law, where governments can step in and, you know, just sort of regulate a little bit. Not do anything too drastic, just stop them from going too far, because obviously they're not just going to decide to give away power on their own. No one gives a fuck anymore, though. It used to be even content producers weren't allowed to own the delivery platform. There were the Paramount decrees, which ensured that the studios wouldn't be able to own theaters, because they could, and they did, pull some shady bullshit that stifled the competition and reduced the possibilities of what could be made. Now, of course, those laws have been repealed, and Disney currently owns 3 content delivery platforms. Disney wants a horizontal monopoly, which they are kind of achieving by buying up all of this IP. They currently own basically every movie that's profitable for a theater to show, and they already have a vertical monopoly. They control basically every stage of their supply chain. The theaters is like the one that they don't, but they basically control them too. With the advent of streaming, which creates an incredible value by hemorrhaging money, theaters have struggled to compete with that, which actually means the theater experience is becoming worse, but it also means Disney can threaten them with not being able to show their movies, and they demand a ridiculous cut of the profits and force them to put their movies on for longer than they reasonably should be. Which, by the way, is exactly the sort of bullshit that the Paramount decrees were about. They're doing it slightly differently because they don't own the theaters, but this is clearly anti-competitive. It's destroying theaters, and it's reducing the scope of what can be seen in theaters. You know, if I want to go to a theater right now, I can watch a Disney animation, a Disney blockbuster, or something trying to be a Disney animation or a Disney blockbuster. There's like 4 movies out right now that everyone's like, oh, you should go see that. No, I can't. They're not in the... Anyway, Disney can make less movies than ever, but they control the studios, the production companies, the construction companies, the post houses, and the visual effects houses, and the music production, the marketing, the TV, the radio, the merch, the publishing, the licensing, the home media, the streaming, the theme parks. So, like, no one liked the live-action Lion King, but Disney can make it one of the most successful movies of all time, which it is, just because they have that dominance. And this is exactly the sort of thing that has been regulated in the past. But we don't do that anymore. Actually, governments are so cucked, they're helping. They're actually assisting these conglomerates in amassing wealth. They're giving them money. The American FTC now fails to enforce any antitrust law, or even offer the most basic protection to American consumers, and increasingly the wider global population, because of deregulation and the corruption and the massive internal conflicts of interest. Disney doesn't face any antitrust action because they have incredible lobbying power. Recently, they've been doing these mergers and acquisitions, buying up IP, buying up entire companies, which they could have been doing years ago. It's just that now they have the public opinion and lobbying power to get away with it, which is not just Disney. All of the major corporations are lobbying against antitrust action. Just this last week, Microsoft's doing the same thing for games, right? Buying up all of their competition, buying up all of this IP just to put it on their subscription platform. Xbox Game Pass is obviously not profitable. I've bought it like 6 times for $1, but it exists with a view to destroying the competition. And these aren't really the most dramatic examples of abuse of monopoly power right now. But, well, I want to keep the scope of this video, I want to keep it narrower than it is actually. It's already out of control. Disney essentially has total control over an art form, and they are absolutely stifling what can be made. With Moon Knight, they're making something that very few people asked for. No one's watching, it isn't profitable, it isn't anything new, but they can force that to be one of the only options available. Moon Knight exists as just like a $100 million node in this larger system. It doesn't really have any value, it is pure loss, but it is a functional piece of promotional material for Doctor Strange 2, and it will enable that to have a larger dominance. And this is different to competing in the market or offering value to consumers. Disney's in streaming not to make money, ever, but just to destroy the competition, which is one of the most anti-competitive things you can do. Streaming isn't profitable, and so far, whenever they've tried to make it profitable, it becomes worthless. And in the meantime, it's devaluing content. Netflix had been making interesting content. They were known for hiring diverse talent, giving people generous budgets with little oversight, and getting things made that would otherwise be incredibly niche, which was nice for a little bit. But they weren't making money doing that. They were just doing it to stifle the competition. So what happened was they undercut those niches where those things were getting made, they ate up those industries, and then all of a sudden now they have to start making money, so they stopped funding it, and they just destroyed all of it. Now, I'm sure none of us care about this, but the CW is currently having to cancel most of their superhero shows as their actually profitable business model is getting undercut by Disney+. Disney doesn't care about the CW, they're not trying to compete with the CW, it's just collateral damage as they try to consolidate their power. And that's a very widespread problem. All content is getting devalued just as a side effect of these anti-competitive practices. So streaming has destroyed the mid-budget movie, which isn't really part of this video at all, but that's, I cover that off in the Boba Fett one. And Disney basically owns the blockbuster. A lot of things have been allowed to get out of control in ways that historically governments have intervened. Blah, blah, blah. Neoliberal capitalism. If you're an American, demand antitrust enforcement because your guys are fucking it for the rest of us. If you're the rest of us, demand caps on those tax credits because our guys are fucking it for us. Cancel Disney Plus and subscribe to calebgammon.com, and I promise I will never swindle the Hungarian people out of hundreds of millions of dollars. If you don't subscribe to calebgammon.com, we'll see. Yeah, sorry that was another weird one. I just thought I'd save the apology for the end this time, just to mix things up. Anyway, it's because I'm working on good content, which will cover off some of this streaming stuff with a bit more clarity and a bit more specificity. Keep an eye out for that, and I think I'll put a review of the Guardians of the Galaxy game up on the website. And if you genuinely want to know my thoughts on Moon Knight, let me know because I can do that, but I don't really care about my thoughts on Moon Knight. Hopefully that's okay. Thanks.